Hey there, Grumpy Old Fart here. This is a compilation video of some of my greatest hits. Hope y'all enjoy them.
Medieval life. Okay, most of the time people we see in movies and TV shows about medieval eras were knights, nobles, and the upper crust. These people could pay servants and purchase what they need to live. Those people were wealthy landowners and or rubbed elbows with royalty. In Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, the character classes who fit into this mold were generally cavaliers, paladins, and the like. Now, certainly there were wealthy fighters, clerics, and wizards who came from the upper crust. These were not commonplace, however, and the vast majority of adventurers of the cleric, wizard, and thief, especially thief classes, come from the middle to lower classes. Let's face it, the life of an adventurer was probably far more desirable than that of a medieval peasant. Let's discuss why. Why would somebody want to adventure when they could have all of this? Ready? When a peasant wakes in the morning, he breaks his fast with breakfast. Yeah, you see that neat little word origin there? This breakfast usually consisted of some form of gruel, oatmeal, for example, salted pork or smoked pork like bacon, and bread, washed down with beer. The noon meal was bread, cheese, and meat and beer. The evening meal was generally ham and cheese and bread, once again washed down with beer. Because they had a lot of hops. That was their thing. Generally, pigs and other livestock were slaughtered at the beginning of winter, so they would not be the animals would not need to be fed. The meat was salted or smoked to preserve it. Bread was a staple in every meal. Generally, white bread was the mark of the upper class. The browner the bread, the poorer the person. Brown breads were generally made of barley or rye. In an inn, a common meal for travelers was bread and cheese. If the traveler wanted to pay extra, there was meat and vegetables. Now, in my world, staying in an inn was generally a silver piece per night, which included a meal of bread and cheese. Just one meal. Guests could pay extra for better meals, baths, stable use, that kind of thing. Generally, laborers worked all day long. They were expected to arrive shortly after dawn and had a short meal or break near midday. Work ended when the sun went down. Laborers trudged through life earning a pittance. Many laborers worked for room and board. In my world, a reasonable wage was 1 silver piece per day for average labor. Skilled labor earned more. Unskilled, really just generic stuff, earned far less. In my world, slaves worked for food, and if they did not perform, beatings and other punishments were common. In some areas, the slave trade in my world was considered an honorable profession. In those areas, it was bad form to mistreat or punish slaves. A slave who was beaten had marks, and that slave could not be sold for as much as an unmarked slave. However, any way you want to paint the pig, it's still a pig. And the abolition of slavery is and has always been a great goal for player character adventurers. I had a group of player characters who targeted slave owners in every town they went to. One of the player characters started out as a slave, and the rest joined in his obsessive and justifiable vendetta. By the time the group had hit 9th level, slavery was gone from the world. They wiped that shit out, and amen. Slavery is evil. I try to make my world as realistic as possible, and there are bastards in every era. So yeah, slavery did exist. Getting rid of it is a hell of a good thing for the player characters to do. Crime and punishment in medieval times was harsh and brutal. Murder, theft, etc. was illegal and carried heavy punishments. A man could be beaten or imprisoned for a long period of time, or even executed for a big enough theft. Murderers were generally executed, sometimes imprisoned if they had political favor or whatever. In my world, murder, blasphemy, treason, and the like were punishable by death. Theft was punishable by imprisonment. Generally, this is what I generally do. Up to a gold piece, you can get a year. If you steal something up to 20 gold pieces, you can get 5 years. Up to 1,000 gold pieces, you can get 10 years. And over 1,000 gold pieces, you can get 20 years in prison. And it's up to the whim of the guy, of the judge, the noble who's overseeing the case. Well, he's been here before and he stole before. Yeah, let's just put him in there forever. Or let's just execute him and be done with it. Save having to feed him. Or my favorite is when the noble shows up and he's holding audience and he's holding court like that, and he comes in and he's been drinking the night before. He's got a hangover, and he says, "Okay, how many we got? 30? Oh man, I don't feel like that. Okay, the first 10 are guilty, off with their heads. Now go on." Which, by the way, did happen. A particularly heinous theft could mean that the prison term would be as harsh and brutal as the guards could make it. Guards were rarely punished for brutality. Now, a word on blasphemy. Blasphemy in my world was... In my world, each town, region, or nation had a specific religion, a pantheon, which was sanctioned by the ruling body. This was the favored religion. Similarly, aligned deities were generally accepted. If you were, for example, if you went into a major port city in my world, they have this thing called Temple Row. Most large towns have a Temple Row where all the pantheist temples were lined up and easy to find. Most towns have a temple. Most big cities have a Temple Row. If you went into a port town, a port city, and you wanted to go and worship your god, say you worshipped Hera, and you go over there and you're going to go find the Greek pantheon. Well, right next door you got the Norse temple, and next to that you got the what do you call it, the Celtic temples, and blah 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 blah, and on down the line. They're all there, and nobody gets punished for that. Blasphemy in this context would be if a person was to worship, for example, a demon or a devil, or a deity that specifically was outlawed by the ruling body, and there had to be a reason for it. They just didn't outlaw them because they didn't like them. There had to be a reason. Now, a word on serfs. Every medieval society had serfs. A serf is a poor laborer who is bound to serve a specific lord, castle, or manor. Serfs are not slaves. A lord can sell the labor of a serf, in effect lending a serf to work for another for a time, but not the serf himself. Serfs are not owned per se, but are bound into service almost like an indentured servant. A serf could be imprisoned indefinitely. A lord could take all of a serf's possessions. A lord could kill a serf, but bloodshed was frowned upon. Many serfs were starved to death or thrown out on a cold winter night to freeze. Many were drowned, but no bloodshed. The loopholes. It's all about the loopholes. Sharecroppers were a type of serf, and the amount of crops left for them by the lord was completely up to the landlord. Everything a serf had was owned by the lord, and it could be taken or used at will with little or no notice. The difference between serfs and peasants is that if a peasant was unhappy where he was, he could leave. Serfs who tried to leave were imprisoned or beaten or whatever. Serfs paid taxes, rent, and other random payments to the lord. A serf was treated as part of the estate and came with the land. Serfs were required to serve in the lord's armies. Serfs needed permission to get married. In effect, they were slaves in every way except name. They couldn't be sold, though. A fair and good lord treated his serfs and servants with a fair degree of respect. Many lords were not fair and good. A landowner in my world is generally an industrious member of society. Most often, lords used every part of their land to generate profit, and the serfs are used to make that happen. Agriculture was the predominant means, but quarries, smithies, distilleries, wineries, and the like are also common. A lord who generated enough wealth to purchase more land was considered successful. He then could use this new land to make new ways to generate even more wealth. There are a plethora of resources available to any dungeon master online to find out what you need to know about, to kind of flesh out your medieval world, there are a number of YouTube channels I would recommend. Here we go. Weird History, History Hit, Modern History TV, Captivating History, Medieval Madness, Simple History, Chronicle, there's a channel called Chronicle Medieval History Documentaries. Many of the videos on these channels are not only informative, but they're very fun to watch. As always, the richness, depth, and realism of the portrayal of your medieval setting is paramount to your players' enjoyment, and all of that is dependent on the amount of research you do beforehand. Many adventurers are thought of by the local lords and nobles as outlaws. The reason being is they don't fit anywhere in that society. They show up every other month or whatever with a great hoard of cash, and nobody knows where they got it. And you're like, well, they're got to be stealing it from somewhere. No, they just robbed the orcs, or they found it out in this old abandoned fortress or whatever. But they prove that. That's the thing. So when adventurers show up and they have all this money, look up economies and the governments that I did videos on those. Check those out. But when adventurers show up and they have all this money, the Lord kind of wonders where it came from and why he's not getting the cut. You see what I'm saying? That's the way I run my world. So adventurers kind of have to keep a low profile. They can party at night in the inn, that's fine. But eventually somebody's going to ask where they got their money from and why the Lord isn't getting his cut. Religions. I try to avoid talking religion with people. I talk about faith, and I am a Christian, but I try to avoid talking about other people's religions per se. However, this is a bit of a different subject because this is the religions in a role-playing game for characters. And as a dungeon master, you have to be intimately aware of the situation. You have to pay attention to the religion that the players choose, because there's a variety of them. And you have to know what in those particular religions entail. So, for most advanced Dungeons & Dragons characters, religion is a secondary consideration. What I mean by that is that for most characters, choosing to be religious is an option. Some are born into a theocracy or some form of cult which forces them to be religious in some way, usually race or region oriented. Some simply choose to be religious, and that's fine. For some characters, however, religion is a necessity. Clerics and paladins live for their religions. Druids worship nature and some nature gods. Clerics are the holy men who further the spread of their chosen deity. They also act as healers and do much of the research on most quests. Paladins are the defenders of the faith. They further their religion as well, but with a more hands-on approach. They're the ones who defend the religion. Druids are less prone to spreading their religion, rather preferring to concentrate on preserving nature. They act as healers, as do clerics, but they lack the scholarly pursuits of library work. In my games, I prefer to use a more open approach to religion. Clerics and paladins, by definition, are required to choose a specific deity to worship. This deity is their lifelong benefactor and their reason for being. They are completely dedicated to that one specific deity. Druids have religious concerns and may choose to worship a specific god. Key, for example, nature god, nature goddess. As long as the alignment and sphere of influence correspond, that's fine. Virtually every other character class has an open slate regarding religion. They have the option to follow a religion or a specific religion as they choose. A religion or a specific deity as they choose. Some are forced into a religious mold by their race or their heritage or their community, but they are free to choose not to conform. This may necessitate, running, fleeing, running for your life, or some form of punitive actions by their fellows, but it is possible for them to buck the system, as it were. Their society may force them to be religious, like, for example, drow elves, they all worship Lolth. The ones who don't probably don't stick around because, the other people won't tolerate them. That kind of thing. Most beings will worship a pantheon rather than a specific deity, if they choose to be religious at all. For example, a farmer may worship the Greek pantheon and sacrifice to Aphrodite when he's looking for a wife. Then he may sacrifice to Demeter for a thriving crop. And when he's pressed into service as a conscript, he may sacrifice to Ares for success and luck in battle. He has options. In my world, temples are rarely to a specific deity, but rather are dedicated to a pantheon with different altars for each specific deity within that pantheon. If a temple is dedicated to a specific deity, it's usually a god that has no pantheon of his own or is at odds with his or her pantheon for whatever reason. Shrines to pantheons or specific deities litter the well-traveled roads, and any cleric or paladin of that pantheon or deity must stop and pray at each of them. A good-hearted traveler can leave coins, if they desire, for the next traveler who may be in need. Clerics and paladins, and in a lot of religions, that's considered a sacrifice. You're doing a good deed for your god, basically. Clerics and paladins are required to donate to their religion. 10% is the standard minimum donation. When times are tough, this is acceptable. But when a cleric or paladin receives a windfall, they are expected to share the wealth with their temple. If the money has to go to other necessary expenditures, then that's acceptable. The local orphans are hungry or need a new roof, or the party has a member that needs healing or resurrecting. The mission requires specific expensive supplies, etc. But lavish or hedonistic, all that stuff is okay, but lavish or hedonistic, frivolous expenditures are frowned upon. A cleric who finds himself with a wagon load of gold and gems and no worthwhile expenditures had better tithe more than 10%. Deities who feel slighted tend to be more restrictive with their spells. The cleric with that wagon load of treasure who donates only 10% might find his spells failing a lot more frequently. Also, note the Paladin strictures numbers 1, 2, and 3 on the player's handbook in the player's handbook on pages 23 and 24. Those govern how paladins do treasure. Now, there's another thing I wanted to talk about. I forgot to put it in this list here, but there's another thing I want to talk about: sacrifice. Many players want to sacrifice to their deity, and many deities have prescribed things to sacrifice. They have certain animals or certain items or whatever, and that's cool. Many players want to sacrifice something for a specific favor from their god, and that's cool. The problem is in the choice of sacrifices. A player character who has 3 magic items, one of which he can't use and never touches, and he decides to sacrifice that one to his god, I'm sorry, that's not a sacrifice. That's I'm getting rid of this, you can have it, kind of thing. It's a hand-me-down, it's not a sacrifice. Player characters who, for example, if his best weapon is a +3 battle axe, and he really needs something, yeah, that would be a worthy sacrifice. You see what I'm saying? If you sacrifice something you don't use, it's not a sacrifice. If you sacrifice something you can't use, it's a hand-me-down. It's almost an insult. You see what I'm saying? Now, if you were to donate said item to a temple, and they can find, later on they'll find somebody who can use it, that's cool, that's reasonable. But if you're going to sacrifice something for a specific effect from your god, it had better be a sacrifice. It can't be a hand-me-down, and what I'm saying, it's got to be a worthwhile sacrifice. That's what I'm saying. Now, I urge you to research mythology and the religions in your world. Make them as rich and detailed as possible. That will enhance both your world and your players' experiences in the world. And after all, isn't that the role of the dungeon master, making sure the players are having fun? No matter what kind of campaign you run as a dungeon master, you need to do some work on the governmental structure. And I recommend reading page 90 of the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide, especially the part titled Duties, Excises, Fees, Tariffs, Taxes, Tithes, and Tolls. That's a mouthful, but it's there. It's the title of it, and then you got the paragraph underneath. A lot of good information in there. Okay, however, most of these won't apply to your player characters, unless they start a business or something. Okay. However, duties apply to goods being brought to market from outside the city or the area where you're going into. If your group brings in several pack animals or a wagon with excess goods, probably from the last dungeon crawl they were in or whatever, the last adventure they were on, the last quest that they completed, they're going to bring all these excess goods in. They found a bunch of stuff they can't use, so they're going to pack it into town and sell it, which is, it happens a lot. They can be considered merchants, and the duties at the gate would apply. And a duty is essentially you're bringing goods in. Let's figure the value, and we either get to take a percentage, or we're gonna cost X amount per animal, per wagon, whatever the system you want to use. The duties would apply, and they do this because they want people to buy local, because it keeps the locals in business. If you have a local guy who's making bread, and somebody else is importing bread, and for whatever reason they can do it cheaper, then the foreign bread is going to, people are going to eat up the foreign bread. Why? Because it's cheaper. So the idea there, it's twofold. One, you're getting excess taxes for the government, because no matter what government you got to have money to run it, and this is how they do it: taxes, tolls, duties, fees, whatever. And the other thing is, they want to make it more expensive for the foreign goods to come in. Okay, that keeps the locals in business. It's got a multiple function there. Now, other things you want to consider when you're running this game with your players is dues are paid to the local guilds. You got your Thieves Guild, the Mercenary Guild, the Mages Guild, whatever. These also could be considered excises. Okay, that fits into this paragraph. I talk about the Thieves Guild and like that in some other videos. A Thieves Guild it's a double-edged sword. They have a lot of useful abilities. The Thieves Guild, they help you move stolen goods out. They can get you jobs, that kind of thing. The bad part is you also have to pay dues, and you kind of have to do what they say. So, there's trade-offs. Same with all these, basically. But anyway, as far as your players are concerned, if they're paying dues to a guild, those are considered excises. Tolls and fees to enter gates and cross bridges, or to use certain roads, are also justified. If you got 4 players and they're riding their horses going to cross a bridge, guards show up. Hey, it's going to cost you each a silver piece to get across the bridge. Why? Well, we've got to maintain the roads, got to pay for the building of the bridge or whatever. Basically, the local lord is milking the system to get him a little extra cash, and that happens. It happens a lot. It happens in our world. Toll bridges, toll roads, that kind of thing. Tithes are generally given to religious institutions in exchange for healing. For example, if you got a guy who's hurt real bad and you take him to the temple to heal, the clerics probably want a nice tithe for that. They're not going to charge you for healing, but they'll ask for a tithe. Over the years, now, one of the things that you really got to be careful with when you're doing this as a dungeon master, you don't want to overdo it, okay? Because it is possible to seriously overdo this. I have seen dungeon masters really go overboard with these things, and I got an example here from years ago. I once paid 10 gold pieces to enter a city gate. And it was just for me. Okay, not the rest of the party, just for me. My horse cost another 25 gold pieces. I had a great sword on my back, which cost me another 50 gold pieces because they were highly regulated. Forged weapons were very well regulated. My longbow that I had on me also cost another 30 gold because it was considered a war implement as opposed to a hunting implement. And of course, they charged me a gold piece per arrow, which I had 24 arrows on me. 24 arrows. I also was wearing scale mail, which cost another 100 gold pieces. I had a dagger, which cost another 5 gold pieces. You could have a knife, and that's legal, but a dagger is an implement of war. Huge difference. And for those of you who don't know the difference, a knife can skin an animal pretty effectively, where you can keep the hide. For example, if you're skinning a bear, for example, you can use the hide for something else later. With a knife, with a dagger makes really poor work of skinning an animal. You probably won't be able to use the hide for anything after that. Why? Because it's not designed for it. It's designed as an implement of war. Huge difference. Okay, they're both technically knives, but they have different functions. So a knife was legal, but a dagger wasn't, unless I was part of the military. So. All this added up to enter the city gate. I had to pay a whopping 244 gold pieces. Generally speaking, your average peasant earns about a silver piece a day after taxes. So to pass through the gate, I had to fork over more than 13 1/3 years of pay, over 13 years of pay for your average peasant. And that was just insane. Imagine what actual merchants had to endure. They're bringing a wagon load of stuff in. You see what I'm saying? And God forbid he was a foreign weaponsmith or armorer, because then all that adds up. I can understand restricting certain items, and the rulers need to generate revenue, but these rates would drive foreign businesses away. Foreign merchants wouldn't even come to the city if they had to do that. This is why smugglers thrive. If it's going to cost you 100 gold pieces to get a specific item into the city, if you sneak it in, you avoid that. That's smuggling right there. You're avoiding customs. Okay. And this is why smugglers thrive. If the dungeon master would only change the gold pieces in the above scenario to silver pieces, the toll would be much better received. 244 silver pieces equals basically 12 gold and 4 silver. There's revenue, and then there's obviously killing business. So when you're running a game, these things are normal. They happen in especially in medieval situations where you get taxed every place you go. Blah 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 blah. The local lord's got to take his cut and every other damn thing, especially in a feudal society. And I'm going to talk about them in another video upcoming. But my point is, obviously, you need to do these things. Duties, tolls, excises, fees, whatever. But show moderation. You don't want to overburden them. And it's one thing to say, the country needs the money for whatever reason, but you may as well just chop the damn legs off. You know what I'm saying? You see them coming, chop their legs off and then let them go. What's the point of adventuring if it takes you the entire haul out of the dungeon to get inside the city? See what I mean? The free market itself translates, and here's my point. One thing many dungeon masters overlook is the effect that adventurers have on the local economy by spending tons of gold in the shops. The economy of a set area is pretty stable. It could be a great economy, a crappy economy, whatever. But it's pretty stable wherever it is. Okay. The massive influx of gold that these players, a group goes on an adventure and they come back with a mountain of gold, as it were. Each one came away with a wagon load of gold. Well, then they go, I need better armor. I'm going to get the armor, get some magical armor, magical swords, whatever. They're in these shops spending all kinds of coinage. Yeah, the town notices because the market notices. And what I mean by the market is the other shop owners see it. If a guy comes into your shop and he looks fairly haggard and he needs to buy a weapon, and say you're a weapons shop or whatever, and this guy doesn't look like he could really afford much, you show him the stuff that he can probably afford. Somebody comes in and he's dressed like the Aga Khan, he's got gold rolling off of him, he's got one ring he's wearing, will buy your entire shop 10 times over. Yeah, the price is going to go up. Why? Supply and demand. Okay. The massive influx of gold that the players spend in these shops will cause spikes in the local markets. A swordsmith who knows that everyone has lots of disposable wealth will raise his prices. Why? Basic economics. If they can afford it, you can charge it. Okay? And I know this sounds like kind of a cutthroat way to do it, but this is how you do business in medieval society. It's the way it is. If there are 4 horses for sale at the local stable, and a stableman knows that all the player characters have paid thousands of gold pieces into the local economy, those 4 horses' value, the price will increase. Supply and demand. A broken down nag suddenly becomes the prize broodmare. You see what I'm saying? Because he can. I was playing in a game years ago with one of the best dungeon masters I ever played under. His name was Art. Great guy. Art was one of those guys who could sit down for a month and design a campaign that your group could play, and it would take years to play it. Okay, I wish I could still play with him. I don't know where he is. My point is, I lost track of him years ago. I was in the Air Force when I played with him, so I kind of lost contact with him. But the point I'm getting at is, this guy ran a really great game, and he made, it wasn't a mistake because he had planned it, but what happened was, in the course of the game, we were underground in a dungeon crawl, and we found a vein of mithril. For those of you who don't know what mithril is, watch Lord of the Rings. Mithril is a naturally mystical metal. It grants a +4 in game terms. It grants a +4 naturally without any magic applied to it, and plus it holds enchantments well. So everybody in the group was mining mithril. We didn't go any further. We just mined mithril. We came out with so much mithril that we were taking the mithril back and paying. We were getting stuff forged for us, armor, weapons, and blah 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 blah, and we were paying for it in mithril. So this town, which by the way, their economy wasn't that great, suddenly went on the mithril standard. People were walking around with mithril belt buckles and mithril this and mithril that, because they had so much mithril coming out of their ears. And mithril is very expensive, so it translated to a boost for the local economy. Unfortunately, then it cost a room for the night that usually costs a silver piece was costing 8 or 10 gold. You see what I'm saying? Because people could afford it. You take advantage of things like that as a merchant back in the day. So let's not forget that the modern equivalents of game coinage. Let's look at it in our modern society. If a peasant earns a silver piece a day after taxes, then let's compare that to the base $10 an hour minimum wage that we have today. An 8-hour work day with a base of 25% tax rate, because you got to pay taxes. Say they charge 25%, that yields $60 a day. Because 8 hours at $10 an hour is $80. You take away a quarter of that for taxes. You're left with $60. Your take-home pay is going to be $60. Compare that to the 1 silver back in the day. So 1 silver equals about $60. Okay, it's a nice frame of reference. Now, that means that 1 gold piece in modern parlance is equivalent to $1,200. 1 copper piece is equal to $6. 1 platinum piece is equal to a whopping $6,000. Because one platinum piece is equal to 5 gold. Remember? Okay. So let's look at a typical adventure. Bob the Fighter has completed a quest for which he was paid 1,000 gold, which is a whopping $1.2 million in today's currency. he decides to live life high on the hog for a while. He's gonna live it up. Gets a nice room in a nice inn, pays a gold piece a night. That's $1,200 a night. It's a nice hotel, isn't it? Visit to the local, because most players do, visit to the local brothel. He's going to pay 3 gold pieces. That's $3,600. He's going to have a heck of a good time. And, of course, afterwards, you have to go to the visit to the local temple for a, just in case, a cure disease. That's another 100 gold pieces, because you gotta pay up for the healing. It's the tithe, as they call it. That's a whopping 120,000 gold. Visit to the local bathhouse, because he's got to get cleaned up afterwards. Runs a silver piece, which is a nice $60 bath. Going to come out smelling good, Then he's got some nice new clothes. Going to pay about 50 gold for those. That's another 60,000 gold piece, or $60,000. Excuse me. Yeah, that's like an Armani suit or whatever. So he's living it up, 3 meals and an ale every day, runs about 6 silver. That's $360. So after a week of this pampering, he has spent 202 gold pieces and 1 silver piece, which is a whopping grand total of $242,460 in modern currency. Yeah. So when you get a player that tips a gold piece, he really likes to tip. Just saying. What do you think that is going to do to the local economy? Somebody spending that much money in the local economy? Yeah. That's going to generate some stuff. The other end of that scale is poverty. If the local economy is so poor that the peasants make only a copper piece a day, which, that's pretty piss poor, instead of that grand and glorious silver coin we used in the above example, then chances are they've never even seen a gold piece. And a platinum piece is literally unheard of. They wouldn't even know what platinum is. If the economy's that bad, they've never seen a gold piece and they don't know what a platinum piece is. They've heard of gold, they've never seen it. They've never even heard of platinum. A swordsmith charging 10 gold pieces for a sword in that economy is going to retain that sword for quite a while because nobody can afford to buy it. The free market dictates he lower the price or export the item to another city where people can afford that grand purchase, the grandiose price. All of these factors can affect your players in the game. Why are people so poor? Is the ruler an oppressive tyrant? Who taxes them into oblivion? Perhaps someone should overthrow him. You see, all of this creates opportunities for adventure for players. But you got to be careful how your players interact with the locals, because they could destroy an economy as easily as they can boost an economy. Players like Bob the Fighter, who throw around gold like copper and show off their wealth, are begging to be robbed, either at the shops with higher prices or in an alley at knife point. Either way, these player characters will affect the local economy, which in turn will affect them. You see what I'm saying? So, it may take a week or so for the economy to really adjust, but when you have a player character going in and spending gold where they've never even seen one before, yeah, it's going to affect the local economy. All that being said, remember, the whole point is to have fun. You got to have fun playing these games. If your players aren't having fun as the dungeon master, you're doing something wrong. It's better to understand not only the rules of the game, but how economies work, how the governments work, the ins and outs of the different fees and excises and tolls, that kind of thing. So when you get the opportunity to do a little bit of research, it'll help you out in the long run, I promise. Meeting up. This video is primarily for dungeon masters, but I guess it'd be okay for players to see it as well. When I started playing Dungeons & Dragons back in the 70s, the impetus of the game was the adventure itself. Consequently, we had most games starting with the dungeon master saying, okay, so you all meet up at a tavern and decide to adventure together. Yeah, that was what they did. Most characters were on sheets of notebook paper the game was in its infancy. The Dungeon Master craft was new at the time, and most of them, as well as their players, didn't really care about preamble or setup. It was more like, we've got a magic user, a cleric, a thief, and a few fighters, so where's the dungeon? You know, that was basically it. Those days are long gone. These days, players come up with intricate backstories for their characters. They fill out notebooks with a profile for their playing pieces in this world, their characters. The Dungeon Master is expected to incorporate all of this information into his campaign so that each player character is relevant to the storyline, the plot, and the world in general. And God forbid if one of those intricate and integral pieces of the story die, the player will make up a new character with a new backstory and profile, which the Dungeon Master then must incorporate seamlessly into his storyline. Imagine, if you will, a paladin of Odin leading the group through an underground odyssey of exploration and discovery in search of mystical MacGuffin number 3, which is necessary for the survival of the world. Then he dies and cannot be brought back, for whatever reason. The player then creates a dastardly thief who would more likely help the villain rather than the group. The Dungeon Master must then incorporate this vile backstabber into the group and make sure this thief has not only sufficient reason to help the group, but motivation to do so. And somehow interject him into the group, who has been exploring the unknown depths of the Underdark for a month or more. It's not like this thief was out for a walk and fell into a hole where he was suddenly found by the player characters. His sudden appearance has to be explainable and believable. Being a Dungeon Master is no walk in the park. What I do, and what I also recommend, is to tell the player that he will have to wait until the next game to get his character into the adventure, the next game session. After the game, the Dungeon Master should contact the player and let him know that you're going to need to run his new character solo so that you can work him into the game. You do this before the next regular game session. That way the player has answers when the rest of the party asks those embarrassing questions like, who are you and how did you get here? You know, that kind of thing. If that luxury of time is not available, the only real option you have is to let the player create his new character while you continue running the game. When he is ready, you give the rest of the players a break while you run him solo to get his player character into the game. It's kind of chintzy, but I see no other real options. I mean, it's tough. It really is. As for the initial meetup of the group, if you want to get them together initially, I've done videos on starting campaigns. Go and check those out. The real trick is finding a commonality, a commonality which binds the player characters together. For example, if the player characters are all from the same small village, perhaps they are all family or friends, or at least they know each other, and must band together when bandits raid the village or an invading army attacks. If the player characters are all from the same area but from different backgrounds and socioeconomic origins, perhaps they are all conscripted and put into a scouting unit under the command of the cavalier or paladin in the group, or some other authority type figure. Maybe the player characters all travel with trade caravans to the local town where they sell their goods, only to have the buyer robbed of his gold. Since they have to sell their goods to feed their families, they must then track down the thieves and retrieve the gold. The possibilities are endless and only limited by the Dungeon Master's imagination and the player characters' profiles and backstories. That's the issue. Player characters these days, every player character is going to have this wild and odd backstory that you have to incorporate into the game. And it has to fit seamlessly. So it is challenging. It is challenging. But with a little imagination and a little ingenuity, yeah, it is possible and it is doable, and it's, like I said, being a Dungeon Master is no walk in the park. That's all I got to say. Movement. I did a video recently on Boots of Speed, and I realized that the movement rules in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons can be a little confusing. I figured I'd try to clarify them a little bit. First off, you want to read the section on movement on page 102 of the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Player's Handbook. That should answer a lot of your questions. To understand movement, you also have to understand distance in the game. Distance is listed by a single mark, an apostrophe, or a double mark, like a quote symbol. The single mark is easy. That's just feet. That's easy. The double mark is the tricky one. Inside, it's counted as 10 feet. Outside, it's counted as 10 yards. So if you have 6 double mark in a dungeon or underground or in a building, 6 double mark is going to be 60 feet. 6 double mark outside is 60 yards. 60 double mark outside would be 600 yards. Basic movement is listed in double mark and is listed per round. This assumes normal movement, being aware of your surroundings. In my world, characters moving carefully and quietly may move slower. Thieves who can move silently move at normal speed. That's the advantage of being a thief. They move silently at normal speed. Characters who are hurrying along can move at 5 times their normal movement. They're going fast, but they're not flat out running, but they're moving quickly. This means they're not checking for traps or taking precautions. They're just moving as quickly as they can down the hallway. Well, let me rephrase that. They're not moving as quickly as they can, but they're hurrying down the hallway. Characters who are flat out running, giving chase, or fleeing in panic, essentially, can move 10 times their normal movement. This assumes that they have a free and clear area to run, because they're hauling ass. They're running as quick as they can. 10 times their normal movement. Now, overland movement, cross country as it were, means that each 1 double mark of movement equals 1 mile per half day's travel. So, if a character with a base movement of 12 double mark travels all day long, he can move 24 miles because he's traveling 2 half days. Right? So he can move 24 miles in a day. That's traveling sun up to sundown, stopping for a quick meal at noon, taking drinks and like that, but he can move. Now note, dwarves and halflings generally move 9 double mark instead of the 12 double mark, while giants move considerably faster. This reflects the shorter people's shorter legs. That's just common sense. Now there's other things you have to consider when you're talking about movement. When calculating how far an army can move, for example, I generally count 20 miles per day for infantry and twice that for cavalry. In a mixed unit or group, the lowest speed must be maintained unless the cavalry is willing to leave the infantry behind. So if you have a mixed group of different things, say you've got orcs and goblins and humans and elves and mounted cavalry traveling together, whoever's got the slowest speed, everybody's got to stick together. That's the whole point of an army. You have an army. But if the faster units, if you just want to say, okay, everybody break up and get there as quick as you can, everybody breaks up and just they go with their own speeds and they arrive when they arrive. That doesn't, there's no party, there's no group unity there though. You see what I'm saying? So there's advantages and disadvantages. Now, there's another thing that people don't understand when it comes to large armies moving quickly. They have this thing called a forced march, and if you don't know what that is, it's just crazy. A forced march doubles the movement rate, but leaves the army exhausted that evening and unable to fight effectively. So you can get them there quick, but they ain't doing much when they get there. That kind of thing. And again, for those of you who don't understand what forced marching is, essentially the leadership, the lower ranks of the leadership follow behind the army with whips. They basically whip stragglers, and anyone who collapses is either killed or left behind. The army literally in a forced march, they're moving quickly all day long. You double their speed, but yeah, they're not doing much when they get there. At least that's how I run it, and it works pretty well. I hope this clarifies the situation, because each individual has different movement rates, and you've got to look in the book to see which one is which. I think humans have a base movement of 12, if I'm not mistaken. Most humanoids. Again, dwarves and halflings have a movement of 9. So, 9 double mark. So, again, I hope that clarifies everything, because when you're talking about movement, you also have to consider distance, and distance is very important when you're figuring out spells and things like that, because you have, for example, Fireball has a blast radius. It's different outside than it is indoors, but it's still devastating. You see what I'm saying? The distance is given in double mark, so it's just the way it is. Again, I hope that clarifies things. As a dungeon master, it is your duty to set the treasures your players find. As I have said in previous videos, too much gold and other monetary treasures has a plethora of pitfalls which you would do well to avoid. If players are so wealthy they don't need to adventure, they won't adventure. If you give them enough money to purchase a kingdom, they'll buy a kingdom and stop. Why? Because they can. That's the whole point of adventuring, is to get rich. If you make them rich too soon, you end the adventuring. Unless you get the greedy bastards out there just running around here. I got more money than I can possibly fit in my castle, but, it's pouring out the windows. I want more! You get those people. At any rate, too much money creates pitfalls. Magic items add a whole new dimension of pitfalls. Before I get started, I suggest you read the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide, pages 116 through 118. This details magic item fabrication. Magic items come from somewhere. Some wizard somewhere is creating magic items. Clerics can do it, wizards can do it, illusionists and druids can do it, and those pages detail how it's done. If you're a wizard and you're creating a magic item, the process for creating an item is, oh my god, lengthy and difficult. Nobody shits out magic items. It's just not happening. There's not an assembly line somewhere. Each permanently magic item to be created requires a permanency spell and a wish spell. Read those spells. Permanency is an 8th level spell which costs the wizard a constitution point permanently each time it's cast. That's part of his life force. If you lose a constitution point, that's a huge deal. Okay? If your wizard has a constitution of 12 and he wants to make a bunch of magic items, most he can make is 12 and he'll die doing it, because his constitution will hit 0. You see what I mean? Higher level wizards who make a bunch of magic items, they have a low constitution. Why? Because it costs them a constitution point to make a magic item. It's a significant deal. A wish spell is arguably the most potent spell in the game. Wish spells are very powerful, and according to the book, in the spell description, the dungeon master must try and twist the meaning and therefore the outcome of the spell. This, by definition, makes the casting spell casting this particular wish spell exceedingly dangerous. Because if you don't word your wish correctly, the dungeon master is required to twist it. I wish that so and so dies. I wish that so and so's character died. That fighter over there, I wish him dead. Well, rather than, according to the book, this is an example given in the book, by the way, rather than kill off that guy, your character gets moved ahead in time to a point where this guy is already dead. So this guy's still in the game, and your character's 20, 30, 50, whatever years in the future, and you've been eliminated from the game. Wish spells are supposed to be twisted like that, according to the book. So anytime you use a wish spell, you have to be very, very careful. It's very dangerous using a wish spell. Magic items are very, very rare for that reason, and therefore should be severely limited to maintain game balance. As a dungeon master, and I speak with experience here, oh my god, experience, you really want to limit the amount of magic items available in your world. And now, I'm not talking about, +1 or +2 swords or whatever. A fighter with a +1 sword or a thief with a +1 dagger. That's nothing. That's just a little bonus in the game. That's all that is. Okay? They're nifty and useful, but they're not. That's not going to kill your game. I'm talking about rings of invisibility, staves of power, staves of the magi, portable holes, artifacts. There's a whole damn list of those damn things. Rods of lordly might. Scrying devices, things like that, the big bad stuff. These items will severely unbalance your game and make the players very difficult to deal with. I'm not saying you should never allow them in your game. I'm saying you have to be very careful how you do it.
He tried to.
Okay? God forbid, and take this to heart because this is a serious one. It happened very recently. God forbid your players get a scrying device and a helm of teleportation. In this particular example, the player had a ring of teleportation, but it's the same concept. It's the same device. It's just one's a helmet, one's a ring. It does the same thing. If they get both of those items, you may as well write off any random encounters or planned ambushes on the trail. Players are going down the trail, and the bad guys jump them, highwaymen, bandits. The big bad guy sends his guys to catch him on the trail and kill him. Just eliminate all that. What's going to happen is they're going to scry on where they need to be and teleport there. Overland adventures, shot to hell. Gone. And they'll do this every opportunity they get. They're going to be teleporting to every location and undermining your adventure at every turn. These two items individually are bad. Not bad, but they unbalance your game. Put them together and they will destroy your game. They're going to drain the fun out of your adventure because there's no travel time involved. You're just boom, they're there. Boom, they're there. Boom, they're there. Okay? My general rule of thumb is that the powerful items should be the culmination of a serious quest. Players below 5th level should never be laden down with magic items of these types. If you want to give one of them a +1 sword or a +1 dagger or a +1 bow or whatever, that's fine. But let them adventure and work hard to achieve these more powerful items. After all, it's not like they came off of an assembly line. Some wizard literally gave part of his life force to create one of these items. And wizards are not a dime a dozen. They're a rarity in and of themselves. So just keep that in mind. I'm not saying don't give out magic items. I'm saying be careful how you give them out. Do not be a Monty Hall when it comes to magic items. Oh, look what's behind door number 1. Chests of magic items. No, can't do that. So anyway, or my favorite one is, it's a magic item shop. Had a player recently make one of those. So, that attracted all kinds of people. But anyway, my contention is limit what you allow them to have in the game, because if they hear of something and they want a quest to get something, that's a basis for an adventure. And if they complete the adventure, by all means, they should get the item. But don't just give tons of stuff out, because that's going to unbalance your game. Cursed items. One of the most devious and diabolical concepts in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, or in any Dungeons & Dragons version, is the cursed item. As a dungeon master, cursed items are just fun. A cursed item could be literally anything, and the effects of such cursed items are literally unlimited. Some of the cursed items listed in the Dungeon Master's Guide include a shield -1 missile attractor, which means it actually subtracts 1 from your armor class, and it either subtracts 1 or gives you no bonus whatsoever, depending on the Dungeon Master, and it attracts missiles. So, bow, arrows and spears and what all. A spear backbiter, which means that you throw it and it comes around, circles around and hits you in the back. Cursed books and tomes. A sword, -2, cursed. Cursed scrolls of all kinds. Chime of hunger. That one's just nasty. We lost a party to one of those one time. Eyes of petrification. Horn of bubbles. Sword, cursed, berserking. We lost one of our best fighters to that one time. This is by no means all of the cursed items in the books. Be sure to read up on them before you include them in your game. 2 points. First, it falls to the Dungeon Master to take every step to convince the players that a specific cursed item is not cursed. That's one of the aspects of cursed items. They pretend to be something beneficial. If a player character knows an item is cursed, they will not touch it. In Lord of the Rings, they had the one ring pretended to be a ring of invisibility, and it worked just like one. The problem was, every time you used it, yeah, you see what I'm saying? It was cursed. Remember. Skipped a page. Hang on. The second point is many artifacts and relics, especially the more powerful ones, are a mixed bag. They have good abilities as well as bad afflictions. You take the good with the bad. Many artifacts and relics appear non-magical and may even appear worthless. I had a player pick up an ornately carved rock that some previous denizen had dropped into a chest along with a few dozen minor gems. The player character threw the rock away, kept the gems. The rock was the Eye of Vecna. It's laying in a dungeon in a cave somewhere. The cursed items in the books are by no means all of the cursed items in existence. Over the course of my dungeon mastering career, which is over 44 years, I have used thousands of homebrew cursed items. Some of the more inventive items include a quill, a writing quill, that helps the player character to write both eloquently and persuasively. It also turns every reader of whatever he's written into a homicidal maniac bent on the player character's demise. Another one was a tome that adds 3 experience levels to every being that reads it. It also turns the reader insane permanently. Some of the insanities, you do the random chart, so some of the insanities are kind of minor. Some of them are pretty bad. So, you take your chances there. A ring of protection +3, which is great for a player character's armor class, but also causes the player character to fail every savings throw they make. An item, like a ring, an amulet, a bracelet, whatever, that causes every person the wearer meets to save versus magic or outright loathe the wearer. They may not try to attack the person outright, but if you go to a shop to haggle for an item or whatever, yeah, you're not going to come out good in that one. Or God forbid you're accused of a crime and go in front of the judge. You see, that kind of thing. A belt of giant strength that not only changes the sexual preference of the wearer, but turns them into a ravenous sexpot bordering on a serial rapist. This one, I found out the hard way, will destroy party cohesion in no time. Yeah. Found that one out the hard way. And plus, it's a belt of giant strength, which means they're really damn strong. It's hard to stop them, A battle axe +3 that does the same damage to the wielder that it does to the target. So you swack somebody with the axe, you do 9 points of damage. Well, you take 9 as well. See. An item that houses a malevolent entity that can influence and eventually control the wearer. You have to be patient and take your time with this one. Trying to control a player character outright will cause problems. This one requires a certain insidiousness and patience. There's a lot of items that are intelligent and will try to influence the wielder, and that happens a lot as well. You got to be patient with that as well. Some items, like I said here, they house a malevolent entity that's either been trapped in there or was voluntarily went in for whatever reason. You got to be patient. You got to take your time. You got to be malevolent and at the same time insidious. You can't just try it outright, otherwise they'll know something's up. Okay? Let them use it and get used to using the item for a while, and that's a great item. It's a sword +5 or whatever. That's great, yeah, And then 4 or 5 battles down the road, maybe that's not exactly the best thing to do. Sharing your food with the party. Maybe they haven't done much for you. What are you doing for them? That kind of thing. Just plant the little seeds there. Make sure that the group is unaware of what's going on. I know that sounds harsh, but that's the item here in question is communicating with the person telepathically at best. Sometimes it's just an emotional thing. You never know. It could just make them be mad at people. The point I'm getting at is take your time. Play it out. Good players will understand that there's nothing personal. But be careful, because some players, I guess, aren't good players. I'm just saying. So this could destroy a party cohesiveness as well. So just be careful with that. It's a fine line. A weapon +4 that attracts diametrically opposed NPCs, PCs, and monsters within a 10-mile radius and compels them to attack the user. Those are just nasty. Those are outright, and you kind of know what they are. Now, remember, cursed items can be fun and hilarious, but you have to use them very sparingly and with temperance. A cursed item can easily destroy a party and destroy your game. I have seen friendships lost over cursed items. It's crazy, but some folks take that stuff seriously. They forget it's just a game. You need to know your players, and you need to know how they will react to cursed items ahead of time. This is not easy, and you can cause serious problems with an item going to the wrong player. Just be aware. Have an out. A way to get rid of a cursed item that is readily available to the party, just in case. I narrowly avoided such a catastrophe with a cursed ring. The player character wearing the ring tried to kill the party cleric, who used Remove Curse, which allowed the player character to remove the ring. The ring was later successfully destroyed, melted down. So make sure they have an out. Make sure it's not something the group can't recover from. Make sure, once it's over and done with, stress that the item did it, not the players. You don't want players pissed off at each other because so-and-so said this. No, that was the item that made him say that. You gotta make sure they understand that. And he was role-playing and he was playing his character. There's nothing you can do about it. Cursed items can be fun, but you gotta be very careful how you use them. That's all. In Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, there are a great many magic items a player character can run across. Most of them are listed in the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide and in the Unearthed Arcana tomes. Always read up on each item very thoroughly before you put one in your game. Some of these items can seriously undermine or throw your game off balance. It's an easy mistake to make, and every DM should be wary of it. I have made that mistake a number of times. Other dungeon masters have made it as well. It's a common mistake. You put an item in your game that's too powerful or does a specific thing that undermines your game. You got to be careful about that. Also, to properly appreciate any magic item, the player must feel its significance and its impact. Accordingly, all magic items should be exceedingly rare. The rarest and most precious of all magic items are the artifacts and relics. I heard them referred to at one point as garbage of the gods. I don't really care for that moniker because a lot of them are used by gods and demons and devils and like that, powerful beings. A lot of them are imbued with the power of these things. So it's not that they're garbage, it's that they, misplaced sometimes, I guess. I don't know. Garbage is not the right word. That's all I'm saying. Artifacts and relics are found in the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide listed on page 124 in Table 3E. The descriptions of these items are in that same book on pages 155 through 164. This section begins with a general description of artifacts and relics as they pertain to a campaign. I suggest you read through that section 2 or 3 times at a minimum to ensure that you understand the power and perils of these items. I cannot stress enough how dangerous owning one of these items can be. Do not take them lightly. If you're a player and you come across one, consider if you want it or not. Because sometimes sometimes you don't want it. The power is just not worth the price. That's all I'm saying. Regardless of the warnings and suggestions, many dungeon masters run artifacts and relics as though they were just another magic item, just a very powerful magic item or whatever. Any dungeon master who does so is doing a disservice to both his players and his game. Artifacts and relics are so much more. They have a backstory. They have a history. They can take your game to a new level just by being in the game. One of the inherent dangers of owning any magic item is the propensity for powerful beings, demons, devils, daemons, powerful wizards and clerics, etc., gods, to want to relieve the player character of these items. This should be a real and palpable threat which your players will have to deal with. The more powerful the item, the greater the threat of attracting a powerful being. If the item happens to be a relic or artifact, multiply that threat level by 10 or more. I cannot stress enough how artifacts can undermine a game. I also cannot stress enough how badly powerful beings will want these artifacts. A human, or a mortal character, I should say, because there's non-humans in the game. A mortal character is subject to all kinds of curses and side effects and things. Most gods can ignore that. Most demons can ignore that. So when they get a relic or an artifact, all they get is the good stuff. You see what I'm saying? So it would behoove them to acquire as many of them as possible. And so you're telling, as for example, a powerful devil or a demon. I want that item, and it's being held by a 9th level character by himself. Well, and he's got a group of 9th level characters with him. Who cares? I'll just go get it. I'll kill him and take it. What the hell? What has he got to fear? You see what I'm saying? And this is, I'm not saying that's the only threat, but that's the threat that, in my opinion, most dungeon masters seem to ignore. In games I have played in where a character has gotten an artifact, they use it like a magic item and go on. Most dungeon masters don't take into account that somebody's going to want that. Oh, I lost that. I'm going to go get it from that guy. Well, he's just a pissant. Who cares, right? It's just another mortal. That kind of thing. Or if it's a powerful wizard who wants it, I'll hire these guys to help me kick the crap out of him and get it. That kind of thing. And those are generalities. But my point being is you understand what I'm saying. Somebody's going to want that. It's going to attract attention. As a player, I have lost powerful items a number of times to powerful demons and devils, and once to a very clever thief in the employ of a powerful wizard. On 2 separate occasions, I lost artifacts to powerful villains. I lost the Iron Flask of Tyranny to Tyranny the Merciless, to a powerful cleric of Asmodeus. And then I lost the Orb of the Hatchling to an ancient huge white dragon who wanted to build an army of dragons. This is part and parcel of owning such items. My character didn't always survive these encounters, because if you've got a powerful item, you want to keep it. Well, how do you keep it? Sometimes you have to fight for it. Sometimes you lose. It's just the way it goes. As a dungeon master, it would behoove you to want such powerful items out of your game unless they play a specific part in the story. If according to the storyline, the players are supposed to have that, then you don't want to take it away from them. But you want them to feel like other beings want to take it from them, to show the power level and how desirable such an item is, and to impress upon them the danger of having it. Greater beings taking the item from your player characters plays right into wanting to take excess items out of your game. If you have a, okay, I don't know why this would ever happen, but say for example you have a 4th or 5th level character, a group of 4th or 5th level characters, and one of them stumbles on an area that you hadn't prepared for, and you roll randomly and it comes up an artifact. Roll for something else, okay? Because this guy's not powerful enough to keep it. The whole group is not powerful enough to keep it. Unless it's part of the game and you want them to have it, that's fine. But if it's just a random determination, roll for something else. Don't give it to them. If they get, for whatever reason, they come across a horde of magic items, and almost everybody dies except for one or two player characters, and they all have this massive horde of magic items that was supposed to be for the whole group. Yeah, you want the excess items to be gone. Okay? That's just the way it is. And that's not to say you should pummel your players' characters every game session and rob them blind using whatever sentient monster available to you. That's not what we're saying. You must use this tactic judiciously and only for items worth the being's trouble. A +1 dagger is hardly worth a demon's time. A staff of power, however, or an artifact or a relic, that's a whole other story. I can see a demon wanting a staff of power. I can see a powerful lich wanting the axe of the Dwarven Lords. I can see that. You see what I'm saying? A +1 dagger, not so much. Just saying. So yeah, if you're running your game where magic item or relics and artifacts are just another type of a magic item, yeah, you're doing it wrong. That's all I'm saying. I've talked about this before in other videos, but I have several friends who keep asking me about how to keep their game on track when the players all want to do different things, while the bad guys are enacting their master plan. They have issues with players that the bad guys doing their thing and the good guys know about it, the players know about it, but instead of following the clues or working towards stopping the bad guy, they're off doing different stuff. The short answer is simple: time. Everything going on in a game, any game, not just Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, any game, takes a certain amount of time. I'm going to use this one because it's prevalent in my mind, because I'm going to use this example because the guy who did it was an idiot. Digging a ditch takes far longer than eating a meal. I believe I did this. I talked about this moron in my game who insisted on digging a huge trench by himself with a shovel and demanded I focus all of my attention as the dungeon master on him while all of the other players sat around bored. I want to say this was called the Necromancer Druid, I think was the video that I talked about it. Go check that one out. Anyway, that wasn't happening. I can't focus as a dungeon master. You cannot focus on one player to the point where the rest of the players are bored. You cannot do it. Basically, this guy got pissed off and left because I wouldn't do what he wanted me to do. I'm digging a ditch. Okay, you're digging a ditch. Okay, you're digging a ditch, and everybody else is sitting around watching. That's just stupid. He got pissed. He left, and good riddance. Each activity the different players do is going to take a different amount of time. Make careful notes and keep specific track of the time needed and the time spent. Out of combat, 6 turns equals an hour and 1 turn equals 10 minutes. 1 round equals 1 minute. During combat, 1 round equals 6 seconds, while 1 turn equals 10 rounds, or 1 minute. Keeping this all straight will help keep everything on track. If some of your players complain, just explain to them your logic regarding how long their activities take. Make sure you explain that before they begin.
player says, well, player A says, I need to clean up this tavern and make it, make it usable for the big party they're going to have tonight. Okay, that's going to take 3 hours. Okay, no problem. Now, while you're cleaning that for these 3 hours, these other players, what are you guys doing? Well, what about me? Well, you're cleaning the tavern. You stated that's what you were going to do. If you don't want to do that, say so now. No, I got to get it clean. Okay, well, it's going to take 3 hours. While you're cleaning, you other players, what are you going to do? That kind of thing. Make sure they know ahead of time. As for the bad guys, my go-to response for further complaints, if they complain about how long it's taking, my go-to response for further complaints is, I'm just the dungeon master. I can't tell you what to do. That usually gets their goat pretty good, and people laugh and people get pissed, but whatever. As for the bad guys, just because the player characters decide to remodel an inn, dig a canal, or forge a suit of armor for a dear relative, the evil plan continues. While the player characters are conducting these side activities, the bad guy is still searching for the MacGuffin, raising their army, or furthering whatever their plan entails. Remember, bad guys don't give two shits what the player characters are up to as long as they aren't interfering with the bad guy's plan. Player character side jobs are gravy for the bad guys. If your player characters know the bad guy is raising an army to attack a city, and they start planting crops, and one guy's digging a ditch, and one guy's out there, playing blacksmith for whatever reason, the bad guy's still raising that army. It's not the bad guy's fault, and it's not your fault that the player characters are ignoring the bad guy. I had a group a few years ago who insisted on helping a village build a log palisade to help them defend against bandits and wild animals. And it was a worthy cause. I'm not saying it wasn't. But it was a large village, and building this huge enclosure was at least a 2-week job for the people who were working on it. While they were chopping down trees, dragging logs, digging holes, and erecting the barricade, the evil wizard was able to find his long-lost magic item and retreat into his mountain stronghold. When the palisade was done, the player characters had a hell of a time tracking down where the item had been, and then they were pissed that he had beaten them to it. I told them, you just spent 2 weeks playing Bob the Builder, you gave him a hell of a head start. I told you how long it was going to take to do this, and you went on with it anyway. The player said, why did you let us do it? I replied, I'm just the dungeon master. I can't tell you what to do. I cannot tell you what to do. I'm just the dungeon master. Yes, they were pissed, but it wasn't my fault. One final note. When you as the dungeon master decide the time frames for whatever bullshit activity they decide to do, make sure that you use logic and common sense. Digging a ditch, for example, is a time-consuming and laborious process. It is hard work and takes a long time. I speak from personal experience. I have dug more than one ditch in my time. In real life. On page 106 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, it talks about mining, which is a very, very similar activity. It also talks about earth excavation. Okay? Make sure, above and beyond anything else, that you explain to your players how long this effort will take. The last thing you want them to be able to cry is, you never said! Because you know they will. You know they will. So yeah, time, keeping track of everything that's going on in your game. Make careful notes. Make sure you know what the bad guy's doing, how long it's going to take him, as opposed to what the good guys or the player characters are doing and how long it takes them. If the good guys finish doing whatever they're doing and the bad guy's plan erupts into motion and the capital city falls and the king is killed while they're off doing whatever, if they knew about it, how long it was going to take ahead of time, it's not your fault. Now the campaign shifts from defending the city to how do we overthrow the evil wizard or whatever. You see what I'm saying? The campaign's not over. It just shifts focus.